Hello everyone. It's 10th week, and let us continue our discussion on trade policies. So, still we are in the process of not that short, actually quite a long review of trade theory. Why are we spending so long time to review the trade theory? Well, to have a good idea on the political economic structure of the trade regimes and also trade negotiation theories and strategies, this trade theory would be the real basic stepping stone of all our discussions. And we are done with our discussion on trade theory, covering classical trade model and also new trade model. And also we discussed about the role played by the multinational cooperation and optimal strategies of multinational corporations, considering all the possible differing international transaction cost and other international environment. And now we are talking about trade policies and its welfare effect. And last week, we discussed the difference between different types of trade policies. And the first type would be so-called price intervention. And second types of trade policy would be quantity interventions. And price interventions varies from import tariffs and other types of export subsidy or import subsidy, whatever policies that directly influence the relative price of international traded goods. And quantity intervention is a policy intervention directly affecting, controlling so-called quantity of the traded goods, like the import quota or similar types of quantity interaction, like the voluntary export restraint or voluntary import expansion would be another types of direct control of the quantity of the traded goods. And tariff also takes two different types of form, so-called ad valorem tariff imposed at the value of the imported goods, and other types of tariff would be specific tariff imposed at specific amount of the tariff. And in this case, ad valorem tariff will be imposed as a percentage of the imported goods. Specific tariff would be a certain amount of money for each unit of the imported goods. That's what we have discussed. And now let's think about the welfare effect of each different types of trade policies. So again, we're talking about trade policies and welfare effects. And first, let's think about the case of import tariff. Import tariff is a tax imposed on the imported goods. And so using a simple diagram, we can show. So first, let's think about the case of small economy. for small economy, as defined earlier, this economy is small enough to behave as price taker. And therefore, let's say this is the amount of quantity, and this is price level. We can describe the domestic demand curve for this small economy can be described in this way. And let's say this is domestic supply curve of the small economy, which would be equal to marginal cost curve. And international price is given in this level. For example, let's say this is international price level. And if this economy is jump into the world of free trade, and then this international price level will be adopted as domestic price at the initial stage of free trade. And then we can easily see that since this is domestic price level under free trade, domestic supply would be made at this amount. And actually domestic demand with the given price level will be reached this level. And the free trade and excess demand, then the amount supplied. How this excess demand can be kind of managed, as this would be amount of import. And so we can see with this amount of goods imported, total consumer surplus would be big triangle above this domestic price level, which is equal to international price, and produced surplus would be a small triangle below this domestic earlier price level, which is equal to international price level. Then what will happen if this country impose an import tariff by this much? Let's say a specific tariff is imposed by this much. And then this would be new domestic price. This would be new domestic price after this import tariff is imposed. Let's say specific tariff is imposed, just for the sake of the simplest of our discussion. It would be equal to international price plus tariff. And then we can see that after this tariff is imposed, new consumer surplus would be small triangle above this new domestic price yellow line, and this would be a bigger triangle below yellow line would be new produced surplus. So what's wrong? And then actual amount of demand with increased domestic price would be lower to this level, and domestic price output level will be increased to this new increased level, and this would be so-called new amount of import after tariff is imposed. So what? So who really suffer or who really benefit? Here, when you focus on the welfare level from the economy as a whole, probably we can do simple exercise. So let's say the area above this big triangle, above this new domestic price, let's say as number 1. And this area, let's try to describe number 2, and this 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so you can describe that the before tariff is imposed, or under free trade. And we can here say after tariff. And here we can see the changes or impact of tariff. And first, when you look at the case of consumer surplus, before under free trade, consumer surplus is a big triangle above the earlier domestic price. So consumers, we can say add up would be total area adding up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And after tariff, this big triangle has been dwindled to small triangle above new domestic price. So what had happened? After tariffs imposed, consumer surplus has been reduced. This minus this would be has been reduced by 2, 3, 4, 5. And then what about produce surplus? Produce surplus, before international trade, produce surplus, a small triangle below this earlier domestic price. And after tariff, this small triangle has been expanded to a larger triangle below this new domestic price. And so we can see after tariff, produced surplus has been increased by area number 2. And then what about government surplus? Government surplus is before trade, there has been no expenditure or revenue. After trade, we can see this is a new amount of import, and this is a specific tariff rate. The total area, this quadrangle area number 4, would be so-called tariff revenue. 4. So it has been added 4. Then when you add up all surplus of each consumer sector, produce government sector, we can say impact on social welfare. And when you add up social welfare, the whole area would be 1 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here, after tariff is imposed, social welfare is 1, 2, 4, 6. What has happened? 3 and 5 has been disappeared. 3 and 5 has been disappeared. So overall, we can see that when you add up all this negative term and positive term, we will end up with minus 3 and 5. So overall, after import tariff is imposed, our net social welfare impact would be we will have suffer a net loss by this area number 3 and number 5. This would be so-called net loss. After import tariff, nobody really benefit, but overall social economy as a whole suffer these types of net loss. This is what we call so-called deadweight loss. Loss of import tariff policies. What is deadweight? Deadweight is, for example, weight of the vehicle or truck, what is the kind of role, virtue, contribution of the vehicle, for example, truck? Truck's role, contribution is to carry a heavy kind of carriages and lots of heavy material. But what will happen if the truck itself has quite a heavy weight itself, and that weight of the truck itself is a weight which is useful for nobody, just the kind of waste of the energy. If the truck, say, weighs very heavy, then it will consume much more larger, expensive gasolines, just increasing the transportation cost. So that's useless weight. So that weight is something useless and something useful for nobody. That's what we call it. So this loss is loss which benefit nobody, but kind of pure loss to everybody. That's what we call deadweight loss. And why do we have this deadweight loss on the left-hand side? This is domestic price has gone up from original international price to this new domestic price level. With this domestic price increase, before tariff was imposed, this amount of the product, which has been actually increased amount of domestic production, has been originally supplied by international producer who can produce at this price. Price was lower, but after this increase of this domestic productions, what is the final domestic price? It has gone up to this much, implying this additional domestic output has been actually produced by domestic supplier. Domestic supply curve is equal to domestic marginal cost curve. So this additional domestic supply has been provided by the domestic producer, whose actual cost is increasing in comparison to international producer by this much. So why this deadweight loss happened by the amount of number 3? This is what we call so-called production distortion. Deadweight loss due to production distortion. Production distortion means, in earlier case of free trade, this amount of output has been produced by more efficient international producer, which can produce at this cost level. But when this domestic production has been replaced by domestic producer with this price distortion, which has been enabled by import tariff, domestic producer whose actual production cost is higher than international price by this much has overtaken earlier international production. So that's why we call production distortion. Then what about the deadweight loss on the right-hand side? It is consumption has been reduced by this much. So demand has been reduced by this much. And this reduction of domestic consumption has been caused by the upward price distortion of domestic price with respect to international price. As a result, domestic consumption has been reduced. That's what we call consumption distortion. Consumption chance has been reduced. So this type, all these domestic production distortion and consumption distortion is caused by what? So-called upward price distortion from the international price. So for small economy, import tariff has just deteriorated social welfare of small economy, mainly due to what so-called domestic price distortion. What do we mean by price distortion? This means domestic price after tariff has been overtly distorted from international price by this much to this amount of the import tariff has distorted domestic price higher than international price by this much. So that's what we call that domestic price distortion from international price. All right, and then let's think about the case of the import tariff that might be imposed by large economy. Then, same story, import tariffs, welfare impact, import tariff or welfare effect for large economy. Large economy is big enough economy that can influence the international relative price, and this economy works as international price leader. And in that case, when you look at the same case of welfare impact, so this is price quantities and same domestic supply curve, which would be equal to marginal cost. And so let's say this is a domestic demand curve. And let's say this is an original international price. And under free trade, the earlier domestic price and the free trade would be equal to international price. Then we can see it's the same story. Consumer surplus would be big triangle above domestic price level, and smaller triangle below domestic price would be produced surplus. And then again, let's think about the impact of the import tariff by this much. Let's say import tariff has been imposed, again, the same size of a specific tariff by this much. If this economy is a small economy, then since it has no influence on the international price, again, domestic price would be simply international price plus the import tariff. However, here in this case, story is different because it is large economy. If the domestic prices increase this much, what will happen? Definitely, domestic demand level will be reduced from this original demand level to this new international demand level. And this reduction of demand level, which happens in large economy, is big enough to reduce global relative demand size. Then if the global relative demand is decreased, what will happen? Definitely, international price itself will be reduced. So due to the big market size of large economy, this import tariff will actually reduce domestic demand of this large economy, which will also reduce the global demand level, which eventually will reduce this international price level. So after this import tariff, we can say international relative price will be reduced, for example, this much. And then this would be, let's say, a new international price. And domestic price would be new domestic price with this international price would be international price plus import tariff. This would be new domestic price. So when you add up this amount of tariff level here, this would be new domestic price. So the earlier domestic price, which assumes fixed international price, is gone. Now we will have only new domestic price. And then we can see that we can also compare. So after this tariff is imposed, we can see the a new domestic price would be this one. So given new domestic price after tariff was imposed, this would be new domestic demand level. And this is earlier domestic supply level. And this would be new domestic supply level. And so this would be a new amount of import after tariff was imposed. In earlier case, demand level, import level was a little bit higher. This is the earlier import level on the free trade. But after tariff was imposed, amount of import has been reduced. So we can see that we can do the same exercise as before. So a big triangle above this new domestic price, let's say, is number one. And this area 2, small triangle 3, this quadrangle 4, 5, and this area triangle below this original domestic price would be less denoted as 6, and quadrangle below this 7 would be this area. And so when you do the same exercise again here, on the free trade, with no tariff, when tariff is 0, and after tariff, and for first we need to think about consumer surplus before tariff. On the free trade, big triangle above the yellow earlier domestic price. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And after tariff, it has been reduced to 1. So the impact of tariff would be, it has reduced consumer surplus by the amount of 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when you think about produced surplus, on the free trade, produced surplus was just simply 6, and after tariff, produced surplus has been increased by 2. So produced surplus has been increased by 2. And what about government surplus? In the free trade, no tariff was imposed. After tariff, total tariff revenue would be amount of import times amount of tariff. This would be tariff. So the total quadrangle would be the tariff revenue. That would be upper quadrangle plus lower quadrangle. So these are net increase of government surplus after tariff was imposed. So again, when you check the social welfare, we can see total welfare and the free trade was this one. And after tariff, total welfare would be 1, 2, 4, 6, 7. So what is the difference? 5, 6 has been reduced, has disappeared. Something we can easily conjecture the same deadweight loss as we experienced in the small economies case. And something new has happened here, number 7, which was, was not a part of social welfare before international trade. So when you look at the source of all this change, we can see that again, this small triangle number 3 would be, we know that this is what, again, production distortion. That is, domestic price has gone up by this much, and as a result, domestic production has been increased by this much, and this larger domestic production has been actually made by the domestic producer whose production cost, marginal cost is higher than the international relative price. So inefficient domestic produce has replaced earlier more existent international producer. So that's why we call domestic production as a part of deadweight loss. Same story here, small triangle on the right-hand side is what this is as described consumption distortion. Consumption. Again, due to the upward price distortion by this much, consumption chance has been reduced by this much. So that reduced chance for the consumption has caused this consumption distortion. Overall, these two will add up so-called deadweight loss of import tariff imposed on this large economy. Then, what about this new kind of area, which is called number 7, which has been actually added up? Where has come this new surplus? This new surplus has been available mainly due to the international price of imported goods has gone down from original international price to this new international price. So we have defined terms of trade is what? International ratio of international price of exported goods and international price of the imported good. This is definition of terms of trade. So when there is no change in export good and only imported goods, international price go down, overall, we will experience terms of trade will go up. So these gains at the amount of number 7 is what? This is what we can call so-called terms of trade gain. So these two, number 5 and 6, small triangle there, this is what? Deadweight loss caused by the upward price distortion. And this number 7, additional gain we had is what? So-called terms of trade gain, which has been available by the reduction of international price of imported goods by this much. So from this kind of numerical and graphic example, we can see these terms of trade gain seems to be larger than the deadweight loss. In that case, we can say that for large economy, import tariff might improve social welfare when terms of trade gain effect is dominating the welfare loss caused by the deadweight loss, again caused by the upward domestic price distortions. So this it would be some exceptional case where import tariff might improve social welfare. Then let's think about some additional welfare analysis case of subsidy policies. Yeah. And then we are talking about so welfare effect of trade policies. And first we checked the case of tariff, and it turned out it depends on different. For small economy, always whatever types of import tariff just deteriorate, only cause deadweight loss due to domestic price distortion. For large economy, we have seen that it depends on whether the terms of trade gains is, if it is larger than the deadweight loss, then this tariff might improve social welfare. If terms of trade gain is lower than deadweight loss, terms of trade gain, in case it is lower than deadweight loss, then welfare import tariff might deteriorate social welfare. So that's what we have discussed. And then, so deadweight loss always reduces social welfare. Then let's think about case of subsidy. Subsidy might be provided to export products or import products. But in most cases, subsidy is provided to exported goods. So let's think about the case of export subsidy. So again, let's start with small economy. For small economy, again, let's say this is an upper level, price level, and this is domestic supply curve, which is equal to marginal cost curve. And let's say this is a domestic demand curve. And then let's think about the initial international price is given, for example, let's say this is initial international price, which under free trade, which would be equal to initial domestic price. And let's say this is the initial domestic price. And then, say we can see consumer surplus would be again the small triangle above domestic price, and the produced surplus would be big triangle below this domestic price level. And if this country provides an export subsidy by this amount, let's say this is export subsidy, then a new domestic price would be this much, and this would be new domestic price, which would be international price plus export subsidy. Then we can think about welfare effects. And again, let's do the same exercise. And let's say this small triangle is number one. And after this subsidy is provided, we can say this is original amount of supply before subsidy, and this original amount of the demand under free trade, and this excess product would be initial amount of export under free trade. And after subsidy policies, we can say with the domestic price increased to this level, and this would be new amount of the domestic output level after subsidy. This is new amount of domestic level, and we can say the amount of export has been increased to this new amount of export after export subsidies. And this price increase has been available by what? Providing this amount of subsidy to the total amount of the output. This total big quadrangle would be so-called the amount of subsidy. So let's say let's describe this small triangle as a number 2, and this small triangle as a number 3, 4, 5, and whole area below this domestic price in number 6. And if you do the same exercise here, so under free trade with no subsidy, and after subsidy, and total welfare change caused by the subsidy. And first, we need to check the consumer surplus. And the free trade with no subsidy, consumer surplus was what? Total area above this earlier domestic price. So it would be 1, 2, 3. And after export subsidy, domestic price has gone up this much by the amount of subsidy, and consumer surplus has been reduced to number 1. So consumer surplus has been reduced by 2 and 3. And then what about produced surplus? For produced surplus, earlier produced surplus was the big triangle below this earlier domestic price. And then after subsidy, since the domestic price has been increased, domestic output level has been increased to this level, and the price has gone up by this much. So we can say produced surplus has been increased to 2, 3, 4, in addition to existing produced surplus, we can say. So produced surplus has been increased by 2, 3, 4. And then what about government surplus? Government surplus, in the free trade, they have paid nothing. After subsidy, there has been total amount of subsidy expenditure by the amount of total import times level of subsidy. This is the level of subsidy. So this whole quadrangle would be the amount of subsidy. So that is the expenditure of government. The total amount of subsidy would be 3, 4, 5. And this is total net loss of government subsidy. So when you add up everything, all the social welfare and the free trade total welfare is what? 1, 2, 3, 6. And here, after trade, what we can see is we have only 1, 2, 6, and minus 5. Yes. So when you subtract this term from this term, we will end up with minus 3 and minus 4, minus 3 and 5. So implying that after subsidy to a small economy, once again, we will end up with social welfare with net loss by this small triangle. This is number 3, and this is number 5. And you can easily imagine what these small red triangles. Same story. Here, domestic consumption has been reduced by this much, since domestic price or product has been distorted by the amount of subsidy. So this is what? So consumption distortion. And this is what? So-called domestic production has been increased by this much. And again, by the produced surplus, food production cost is higher than earlier international producers. So this is what we call production distortion. Altogether, again, net loss, what we call deadweight loss of subsidy policies. Why? All they can experience for small economy is just an increase of domestic price, which is what, again, the domestic price distortion, overt price distortion of domestic price is a major reason for this deadweight loss. So can you expect any benefit from export subsidy from the perspective of small economy? No, just a net loss due to the domestic price distortion causing deadweight loss. Then let's look at what will happen for large economy. We have seen that in case of welfare effect, of subsidy. now let's think about the case of a large economy. In case of import tariff, large economy could get some welfare gain when so-called terms of trade gain dominate deadweight loss. Let's see whether the same thing might happen here. So I think this is the quantity, price, and domestic supply curve, demand curve. Let's say this is original international price, which should be equal to earlier domestic price under free trade. And we can easily see that consumer surplus would be a small triangle, produce surplus would be a big triangle below this earlier domestic price, which is equal to international price. And then at this level, if let's think about the case that subsidy has been increased, provided by this level. Let's say this is the amount of subsidy. And same story. If this subsidy is kind of provided, then new domestic price would be international price plus this subsidy increased, and this increased domestic price of large economy will reduce say domestic demand. This is what original amount of the demand, and if there is no change of international price, you can see domestic price, domestic demand might reduce this much, and this reduction of domestic demand is what big enough that will reduce the world global demand of this product. As a result, this new increased amount of domestic price will kind of add a downward pressure on international price, and after that, we will have new international price of the product, which is lower than the original international price. So with this new international price, this is new international price, and when you add up this subsidy, this would be what new domestic price. New domestic price, which is new international price plus subsidy. Yeah. And then you can say this would be new international price. And with this new international price, we will have new demand curve, which would be this one. This would be a new demand curve, and domestic demand has been reduced by this much. And with this new domestic price, this has been the original output level, and after subsidy, domestic output has been increased this much. And so now you can have a good idea on what will be the amount of the deadweight loss and possible impact on the gains from trade. So let's do the same exercise here. So small triangle above new price level, let's call it as number one. This is number one. And this flat quadrangle is number two. small triangle number 3, 4, small triangle 5, and let's say this whole area, big quadrangle as uh, 6, 7, and big triangle below the domestic price as 8. Yeah, so let's do the same exercise once again. So on the free trade before subsidy, when subsidy is not provided, and after subsidy and impact change of subsidy. First, look at consumer surplus. Before international trade, before subsidies provided, we can say the triangle above this original domestic price would be total amount of consumer surplus. There is 1 plus 2. And after subsidy, domestic price has gone up to yellow line, so it's just 1. You can say consumer surplus has been reduced by the amount of 2. And then we can think about produced surplus. Before subsidies provided, big triangle below this green line, that is original domestic price level, it should be 6, 7, 8. And we can say after subsidy, since domestic price has gone up and the domestic price has increased by this much, so we can say to the original amount of the produced surplus, this further area of 2, 3, 4 has been added. So we can say after subsidy, produced surplus has gone up by this much. Then what about government surplus? From the perspective of government, after subsidy, total amount of the export is, this is total amount of export after subsidy. And to this amount of export amount, subsidy by this specific subsidies provided. So total amount of subsidy would be, this is expenditure, so we can say total amount of subsidy would be 3, 4, 5, and big quadrangle 6. This is total amount of subsidy. So from the government's surplus perspective, this is net loss, since the non-existing surplus has been paid out as a net payment from the government. So when you add up the social welfare, you can see on the free trade with no subsidy, 1, 2, 6, 7, 8 was total welfare. After subsidy, we can say 1, 2, this negative 5, and we have still 7 and 8 remaining here. So in consumer surplus, before international trade, it has been 1, 2, and also we have to add 3, right? So whole this triangle would be the total consumer surplus. So we need to add here 3. So this, when we subtract this term from this term, we will end up with minus 3, minus 5, and minus 6. So all just a kind of net loss. Here, what we have is pre-existing net loss of deadweight loss, this much. This is what we can easily see. Left-hand side is what consumption has been reduced by this domestic price distortion. This is what consumption distortion. And right-hand side, red triangle is, as we have seen before, domestic production has been increased by this much by inefficient domestic firm, production distortion. Then what about the other types of big loss here? This big loss is what? Number 6 would be, this number 6 would be so-called the additional loss caused by the reduction of export goods price. Initially, international price of this export good was this one, and this has gone down to this much. So this is what so-called terms of trade deterioration. So altogether, we can say this purple area would be what so-called whole this area we can call as what terms of trade loss. Why? International price of export good has gone down to this level. So very surprisingly, from the perspective of large economies, in addition to this pre-existing so-called deadweight loss, combining consumption distortion and production distortion, we have additional loss, what we call terms of trade loss. So this is what we can call the worst kind of possible trade policy that causes the biggest kind of loss to the large economies. And very surprisingly, in realities, we are observing that this kind of was self-damaging, almost suicidal, kind of stupid trade policy that is providing export subsidy by a large economy that deteriorate their terms of trade, eventually cause terms of trade loss to their economy, in addition to deadweight loss caused by the domestic price distortion, is very often, almost repeatedly adopted and implemented by the politicians, leaders of the advanced economies. And then first, we need to ask, why are they doing this stupid behavior? First possibility would be they have never taken any courses in economics or trade negotiation strategy courses seriously. So first, possibility that they are simply stupid enough to repeat these self-damaging policies. Or some other question is, there might be some reason why they are repeating these types of definitely self-evidently self-damaging, seemingly quite stupid and strange behaviors. That question is raised under the format of so-called political economy of trade policies. And we will have a very good idea why this self-damaging kind of trade policy is so awfully and almost repeatedly adopted by large economies and even by the small economies. And before we get into those discussion of political economy of trade policies, let's briefly discuss about kind of quantity restrictions. And we are talking about welfare effects. Of trade policies. And according to what we have observed, first, for price distortion, we have first, from the perspective of small economy, we have seen that import tariff and export subsidy, whatever types of trade policy taken by small economy, always cause just deadweight loss with no gains at all, just deteriorating their social welfare. Why? Due to the domestic price distortion. Then what about large economy? For large economy, in case of tariff, there might be some case if their terms of trade gains dominate deadweight loss, then they might expect some welfare gains. However, if in the opposite case, there is the terms of trade gains is dominated by deadweight loss, they will again experience welfare loss. And then what about export subsidy? We have seen that this is one of the most stupid and worst kind of trade policy they can expect. This causes not only deadweight loss by the domestic price distortion, and even they provide more serious terms of trade loss. Always their export relative price of export goods going down eventually causes further loss. So altogether, can you expect any benefit from a price distortion by small or large economy? For small, always welfare deteriorating, and for large economy, in most cases deteriorating their welfare, especially in case of export subsidy. And so we can say whatever price distortion is in most cases actually deteriorating their social welfare. Then why is, say, Donald Trump and even the leader of small economies and also the Prime Minister of India, Modi, is so eager to implement tariff and subsidy, which eventually deteriorate their welfare? Question that will be answered in our next discussion on political economy of trade policies. And before we finish about our discussion on trade policies effect, we can think about quantity intervention. quantity intervention. Price distortion is caused by the price intervention. Quantity intervention. And first, we might think about import quota. And we might have question of welfare effect of the, let's think about import quota. Quota, there is a quantity restriction setting up a limit of whatever trade might be also imposed at export. And first, let's think about the case of import quota. So we can say the welfare effect of import quota would be supply, which is equal to marginal cost demand curve. And let's say this is the, for example, initial international price, which is equal to domestic price before quantity restrictions. Then this would be initial amount of output level, initial amount of demand level, and this would be initial amount of export before quota is imposed. And let's say, I'm sorry, this is actually, I'm confusing you due to my similarities. And this is demand level. Yeah. This is a demand curve, and this is the original demand level, and this is original output level. Therefore, this would be initial amount of import before quota is imposed. And if quota is imposed at the much lower level than initial import level under free trade, then let's say they said this original import should be reduced to new amount of restricted amount of import. For example, this is a newly amount of quota, which is equal to the amount of quota. Then actual eventual equilibrium would be just the case when the eventual import level is equal to the originally imposed let's say this is original import quota imposed. Then after this import quota is imposed, then eventual market equilibrium would be exactly the same as the total amount of import is same as the original quota imposed. And then if this quota is imposed, eventually, since the domestic amount of supplied imported goods is reduced, then naturally and mechanically, this would be new domestic price after this quota is imposed, and which is exactly the same to the case where even a specific tariff by this level of tariffs imposed, it'll end up with the same amount of the import, which is equal to the import quota. So as a result, even import quotas imposed, we will experience the same outcome of the welfare producer consumer surplus is decreased, and produce surplus increased this much, and if the quota rents, but if this would be what we call quota rent. Since total amount of imported is allocated by quota, and the guy who got the license for this import quota, they can experience this amount of price increase. So this additional gains as quota rent is allocated to the guy who got the quota license. So overall, the social welfare would be exactly the same with this this is deadweight loss caused by production distortion, and again this would be consumption distortion. And as long as this quota rent is kept by some domestic agent like the importing firms, or if the quota rent is kind of auction and eventually all this quota rent is extracted by the government, it would be exactly the same as the import tariff. So as long as this quota rent is allocated to the domestic economic agent, the economic impact would be exactly the same as the import tariff case. Then we can think about some different types of quantity restriction. Quantity restriction. The first type is quota rent. Then what will be the case of so-called different types of quantity restriction, like the so-called voluntary export restraint. In short, VER. This is the story that Ronald Reagan and Father Bush president had imposed on Japanese kind of government, Japanese prime minister. And so, hey, Reagan and Father Bush told the Japanese prime minister, hey, I might impose you import quota, but say I'm a nice guy, I will not do this. So why don't you you voluntarily restrain, limit, reduce your export amount by certain to this level, which I wish. So let's do it in peaceful way. Instead of my own arm twisting imposition of quota, it would be great for you to restrain your export voluntarily to the amount of quota which I might have imposed. And actually, Japanese Prime Minister has agreed in the 1980s a few times, mainly over the automobile products. And so Reagan and also Father Bush was very happy advertising that he's actually promoter and the proponent of the free trade policy instead of U.S. imposition of import quota. In harmonious way, Japan has voluntarily reduced their export, taking the voluntary export restraint policies. And it turned out one of the most stupid behavior simply allocating this import quota rent not to U.S. Domestic agent, but to Japanese exporting firms. So what is the difference between voluntary export restraint and import quota? This is what? This is just the case that this quota rent is transferred to exporting countries, mainly firms, exporting countries. So simply transferring this quota rent from the United States to exporting Japanese firm and turned out to be one of the most stupid policies. And next week, we will figure out why United States, or not only United States, all major so-called advanced economy and even small developing economy is repeating this stupid behavior. This is the exceptional performance of the stupid U.S. president. And not only U.S. presidents are stupid, but also most developing small economies are repeatedly doing self-damaging price distortions, and large economies are also consistently repeating this self-damaging subsidy, which kind of causes direct damage to their economy. And question, are they crazy? Or is there some other reason which we might describe this self-damaging behavior as rational? And very surprisingly, next we will find, even if this self-damaging behavior is something rational from their political perspective. So that's the kind of discussion we will make, so-called in the context of political economy of trade policy, which will also give us a very good idea how the trade regimes, international trade regimes, came to collapse these days after the amazing performance of Donald Trump. Okay, yeah, that's it for this week's discussion, and see you next week.